首先我来跟各位介绍一下我们今天的语坛人，其实就在那个图片上我们中华书屋杨朝凯杨副总，我美国服务协会的贸易经理，我们的 Alexander， 明尼苏达州 Jim 还是 Jim，Welcome Jim。And Ryan from the August Media, yeah. Nate from Ohio, yeah, thank you. 那首先呢，我们先请我们的杨朝凯副总他是我们语坛人。我们知道，我们每个月在这个供需报告之后我跟杨朝凯副总，我们都有一个 MJ Talk 在我们的脸书上直播。那这个月正好，我们就在这个实际的场地上跟各位来直接直播那首先第一个问题，我想要先请教一下杨副总，就是美国玉米相对于我们南美包括巴西啦、阿根廷啦，以您多年的这个谷物贸易的经验觉得这两者之间的差异，这个优劣的程度是在什么地方？想要请朝凯副总分享一下，谢谢。
好，谢谢卢代表。那美国玉米我们知道，长期对台湾来说的话，我们影响蛮大的尤其是我们的养猪的业者非常喜欢使用美国玉米，因为它的那个 starch 比较高，能量比较高。那相对一点的话，在毒素方面的话，像专家都已经有提到过了，毒素非常的低，甚至没有，所以使用起来是非常安心的。那巴西或阿根廷的话，因为它本身质量有点不一样，它属于比较胶质玉，偏硬，对我们的禽类是有一点点帮助。可是以美国他们长期研究起来发觉，如果整批都使用美国玉米的话，其实它的饲料效率是最好的。所以是希望在座有饲料业者的话，应该可以采用全面都改用美国玉米，对我们的饲料效率是最有帮助的。谢谢。
非常谢谢朝凯副总简单的分享。那也根据朝凯副总所回答我也有一个相应的问题要请问一下我们那个 Alex The question is regarding to U.S. corn quality as well. As we know that the broken kernel and foreign material of U.S. corn, in average, people will think about be higher BCFM rather than South American, like Brazil and Argentina. But I knew that we do have a feed trial test research report. Could you sharing about this? That is it the bad quality of the higher BCFM, and what's our trial study can show to our audience?
Of course. Thank you very much for a great question. So when we talk about broken corn and foreign materials, it's important to note that in the case of the United States, it's not a bad thing. Feed millers or starch producers, they shouldn't look at it as the end of the world. U.S. corn, broken corn, contains 95% of its nutritional value, so you're still able to use the great majority of it and really not lose out on efficiency or essentially its value in the feeding chain. So there are ways in which you can manage BCFM. One way that we always recommend is to separate out the BCFM prior to storage in the silo. This way, depending on the market, there are some where you can sell broken corn for similar prices to whole corn, or you can reintegrate it. And in the case of the quality, the way we look at it is that it's not bad quality. If anything, U.S. corn continues to perform superior compared to other origins. In the poultry industry, we have been doing a study with Auburn University. Essentially, we did a study with North Dakota State University on milling efficiency and found that due to the softer endosperm of U.S. corn, it breaks down easier while using less energy, thus saving money and increasing profitability. And then when we looked at this at the feed side with poultry, we found that U.S. corn had lower feed conversion rates or ratios compared to other origins. And what this essentially means is that you can feed the same amounts of birds for less price, or you can increase your production with the same amount of feed. So what we've been seeing is that even though it's about 2 cents per bird, when you use a multiplier effect, we're speaking about tens of millions of dollars of additional revenue that could be left on the table. So we are working on commercial trials right now in Morocco, and the next week we should be getting the data on that. So I'll be happy to share that with Michael, so he can share with the rest of the group. But it is something that we find the broken corn or U.S. corn, even though it maybe looks a little bit dustier or doesn't look as pretty as some other corn origins, it performs just as well. And we like to always use the expression, or essentially the saying that a sports car with dust is still a sports car. So in this case, U.S. corn is still a sports car. It just is maybe a little bit dustier, but it performs just as well, if not better.
Thank you for Eric's comment. And Jim, you want to comment? Thank you.
If I could, Minnesota Corn participated in funding that study that took place at North Dakota University. And one important factor that came out of that was when you look at that, you look at everything, and the horsepower requirements that were attributed to grinding U.S. corn. There was a significant advantage to using U.S. corn in that respect. One thing also that was noted, because those samples came in from origin was Brazil, Argentina, and then we ended up doing Ukrainian as well. The U.S. corn that was shipped in, it actually was imported back. So it wanted to keep everything fair. Was a lower quality. It was actually sample grade. So in some of those tests that were done, U.S. corn was at the absolute poorest quality that you could ever hope that you never want to really get this, but yet 95% efficient compared to our competitors. Another factor on that test that was done was on the milling equipment itself. The U.S. corn, you have less maintenance and upkeep and replacement costs due to your milling than you would with the harder corn from our South American counterparts.
Okay, thank you for Jim's comment. 那下一个问题我就交由曹凯副总来问。那可能您对这个分析，我们市场分析师有蛮好的问题，来请。
我先想要问农民一下哈，两个，因为目前其实看那个报告来说的话，怎么讲？它的单产比较低，可是容重的话却是5年平均是最好的。那因为我们今年的话看到那个到货的玉米品质跟去年不太一样，去年美国玉米颜色比较偏白一点，可是现在到港的玉米品质的话是比较偏黄，而且稍微有一点硬，感觉很像巴西玉米，这是目前 user 所回复回来的。所以我在想说，这样子是不是跟我目前刚才分析师所提到这个单产降低，可是容重却是一样的水准，甚至更好，是不是跟这个品种是有关系的？是美国在今年应该都算去年种植的话，品种是不是有更换的，所以才有导致这样的一个问题。
Okay, I think the question will go to the Nate and Jim that the currently we receive the quality from the United States that will be similar to the Brazil. So the Jerry is wondering is we have a new trial to plan this the last year when the harvest is it different from the before about the corn you plant? Nate one.
Yeah, so I'll Nate, you can fix whatever I screw up on this, but there are parts of the United States that had an absolutely phenomenal growing year and an absolutely phenomenal crop. And that can, you know, when you look at the grain quality report, over 600 samples were taken in different locations. So it's an aggregate of all of that. But, you know, keep in mind, you know, it just so happens that the two farmers on the stage we didn't have the best crop in growing conditions, but yet quality on like everything that come off of our farm was all above 56-pound test weight. And even though we had a lousy growing year, the varieties and the seed selections and conditions just allowed us to have some really good quality.
And the only thing, is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that I would add to that is every year when we're sitting down to pick what hybrids we're going to plant, you might have a few that stay on for 2 or 3 years, but you're getting every year inundated with new genetics coming out to push hopefully the yield barrier, disease resistance, drought tolerance. So it's very common to have a couple, even up to a third of your hybrids be new on your farm to try out.
Okay, now Ryan wanna add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, the USDA didn't do this panel any favors whenever they lowered the corn yield estimate last week. And to the point of the U.S. Grains Council, test weights are higher. In the USDA, in their latest WASD, they effectively said they reduced yields because of test weights. And so something doesn't stack up here. I think really what we saw is, the 179.4, I think, is where they put the yields now. That's still a record yield, right? We're still actually having very good yields in the U.S. And test weights are up. It's reflected in the yields. What happened was the USDA, we had phenomenal growing conditions over the summer, and they got stuck on this 183 bushel, and they didn't let it go when they should have. We knew back in the end of August into September that we were having very dry conditions, and that was pulling down moisture, and that was probably docking some of the yields. We knew that months ago, but they didn't factor that into their numbers until January. Why they didn't do that? That's a question for the USDA. So if you take out that 183 that we've had for the past 3 months, and you pretend like that wasn't there, and you just take the 179.4 that they reported, that makes sense with every other piece of information that we have. It's a little bit of, shame on us for believing that 183 to begin with, but that's what we thought it was going to be. 179 makes sense given test weights and everything else we know. It's that 183 that caught us all off guard. It probably shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Okay, thank you. And Jim?
Yeah, so along those lines, I've been involved in setting budgets for our Corn Research and Promotion Council. So we go through this exercise ourselves as far as trying to figure out what the Minnesota corn crop is going to be. Because that, based on the checkoff, we receive 1 penny per bushel, and that's a farmer participated program. So we look at a variety of things amongst Minnesota, but one of the things we also take very and pay close attention to is the Pro Farmer Tour that takes place every summer. Those are actually boots on the ground. There's farmers that are going out in the fields, and they cover pretty much the entire Midwest. And we really take that information and is held in high esteem.
That was at 181, and that was before the drop. So 179.
Okay, thank.
No, I was just going to add the Pro Farmer, and this would have been back towards the end of August, was at 181. And then we had dry down through September and October. So 179 fits Pro Farmer, not the 183 from the USDA.
Okay, thank you. Next question will be， 事实上是曹凯副总的问题了啊，那我就直接问曹凯副总，你要讲一下你的问题吧。
这个问题就是要请问一下那个 Ryan， 他在那个简报最后面他讲说期货会涨嘛，所以大家比较好奇，那个期货价以他的看法，他觉得大概会是在什么价格左右？
So the jury would like to know the price range that I think that the next slides will show the most bullish stock use ratio will be down to 9.1%, right? And up to 11 point something. That will be affect the futures price range. So can you give me a wild guess?
Yeah, I'll take the coward's path, which is the economist's path, and say that I frankly don't know if prices are going to go up or go down. If I did, I can make a lot more money. However, the reality is we're looking at a risk in which the stock-to-use ratio is likely to drop below 10%. The two primary factors we're looking at demand for U.S. corn for the marketing year ahead exceed where the WASDE currently places it. And if those things come to fruition, even if they come partially to fruition, that drops us below 10%. Does that get us back up to $5 by the fall? That's dependent on a whole lot of stuff. I mean, so much of what's going to shake this market over the next year is going to be a policy situation. We have to see what happens with the 45Z tax credit. We have to see what happens with the value of the U.S. dollar. We have to see what happens with interest rates. There's a lot of things that could come in, and they're a policy factor and a macroeconomic factor that aren't market fundamentals. I'm a market fundamentals guy. I look at S&U sheets. Those things could come in and cut us out at the knees and create any different reality than what the balance sheet suggests we should be at. So the risks are prices are likely to move higher. The risks are also the market's going to be driven by policy that's going to be driven by a totally different presidential candidate than we've had for the past 4 years that has a very different agenda than what we've had for the past 4 years.
OK， 其实我也是认为啊，今年的市场预测可能是最困难的一年啊。现在在场也有很多那个谷物供应商，像 Cargill、像 CHS 啊，也都想要问啊，或是自己问自己。我本来自己在 USDA 报告之前，我觉得说应该大概还 OK 了啊，因为中国也没什么太大的进口的状况。南美这2年状况也都很好，可是 USDA 报告应该一变化，再加上今年有很多可能的这个政治因素啊，还有贸易相关的一些未来啊，刚刚 Ryan 有谈到很多因素，让我们实在是太难预测。今年是一个大哉问啊，是一个非常非常大的课题。那也因为这样子，我觉得市场因为大家都会认知的变动因素太多的情形下，其实讲实在话会不容易跌，要跌可能不容易，因为很多因素都是会刺激这个市场会跳起来，而现在市场的价格反应是非常快速啊，所以我现在也比较倾向是偏一些比较利多的一个市场看法。OK。And then, well, next question will be also go to the farmers that Nate and Jim regarding to what extent that biotech, I don't know, biotechnology or GMO crop would be help you. How do they affect your productivity, profitability, and also the sustainability in the farming in your farming? So could you share about your comments and opinion regarding the biotech?
Okay. Yeah, I'll be happy to. So like I kind of alluded to in my presentation, we use biotechnology in our seed genetics on our farm. It fits hand in hand with our conservation goals of wanting to do cover crops and wanting to build soil health and whatnot. It just allows us different chemistries in our toolbox to control weeds. The cover crops allow us to let them grow longer by having the cover crops in there. We gain weed suppression, we gain compaction. It fights against compaction in the fields. It helps eliminate soil erosion, water erosion. So there's huge benefits for us on our farm level to have the cover crops. If we didn't have the biotechnology in the seed genetics, to have the chemistries in there, because not all cover crops can just be terminated mechanically. A lot we still rely on chemistry to terminate them. So it all goes hand in hand for us on our farm to be able to build that conservation piece and that sustainability piece.
Okay, thank you. And Nate, yeah, but Jim, your comment about this?
The industry has come so far in the last, even it changes, it seems like every year, as Nate alluded to, our varieties are changing. And also, we got to look at the billions of dollars of investments that our seed companies are making in keeping the latest and the greatest. But there's also failures. The seed companies are not going to put something out that is going to not be of quality. Now, years ago, I used to have to hire an airplane, and that airplane's job was to spray for corn borers. Because if you get corn borers, they chew at your ear shank, they damage the quality. There's always feeding that happens on that ear. So we used to have to spray with insecticide to protect our crop. So that's something that biotechnology has taken out. Well, at the end of the day, we've got a better quality, because even though we maybe kept that ear from falling on the ground, there was still chewing, and that happened. And anytime you chew on that kernel, that also gives you the opportunity for disease to enter into that kernel. So that's just one small example of how biotechnology has taken it. So we're not using the insecticides that we used to use. And that's one thing that's always important and sometimes overlooked in cover cropping, is you've got the protection above the ground, but you also have protection below the ground.
Okay, thank you. And other than biotechnology, all of you should know that the global trend of the AI application. So do you expect that the AI application will affect your farm operation, farm management in the near term? So Jim and Nate, could you share about your opinion? Thank you.
I do believe that AI is going to play a role in the future. I'm not one that's going to go backwards in technology. Our farm right now is looking to expand into drone operation and expand into cover crop seeding by drone, also fungicide application by drone. If we can apply that fungicide, we can have a better, healthier stock, and that will lead to a better, healthier kernel of corn, which is what you folks care about.
The only thing I'd add is that there's already manufacturers out there on more so at the university level, where they're doing these autonomous tractors and doing these different studies out there and using those. I haven't seen it on the wide-scale farm use yet, but I suspect that in my future, I'll be at some point sitting in my chair telling the tractor to go to the field to plant, and I won't be the one sitting there.
I'm thinking the robot will replace your work. Yeah. OK， 那我们现在开放我们现场问题，好不好？我马上看到夏博士举手有问题了，请夏博来。夏博，请您用麦克风。
韩总说有机肥和化学肥他们用的比例大概是多少？因为这个在我们这边也是一直在讨论这个问题。第二个是他怎么样干燥他的玉米因为他说他不干燥，他说他的过程中间没有用干燥的这种东西，然后他怎么干燥他的玉米？第三个，这是我自己要问的，他的水的来源是哪里？他很奇怪的就是说，他们都是平地的地方，他的水从哪里来？OK， 谢谢。
I'll take the last first. Irrigation water for us, over this last year, we installed some center pivot irrigation. And our well is drilled, and we're about 480 feet in depth for our irrigation water. We're sitting on an aquifer that is very, very plentiful. And Minnesota, as I mentioned, is land of 10,000 lakes, so and probably 1 million mud puddles. But what was the second part of that question? Oh, okay. We're gonna take the drying. Nate's just chomping at the bit to take the fertilizer. So the drying, we have no choice in Minnesota. We can take the risk and leave our crop out there longer so it would field dry, but then we're dealing with snow and also wildlife that plays a role. So what we do is we have what's called a mixed flow and also a heat recirculating dryer. So we're able to dry at a lower temperature, and that preserves the quality. The folks that were on our farm had an opportunity to look at the quality of the corn that was there, and I would love to ship that over here, but that's not how it works. But the lower the temperature, the modern dryers are a whole lot better than what it used to be.
Try to remember all three questions. The first on irrigation. We do not irrigate where we live. We are all dry land, and like Jim kind of alluded to, he's on the Minnesota corn board. I'm on the Ohio corn board. There is only one farmer on our board that has irrigation, and it's only on 10% of his acres that he's starting to. So all of ours is dry land, and we are thankful for what moisture we get. Number two was drying. We have a continuous flow dryer where it recaptures the heat, so the corn comes in, it looks like a tower dryer, and so the corn comes in from the top and feeds out the bottom. So as it continues to move down, the burner's kind of in the middle of the dryer, and that heat blows up through to try to capture some of that heat, and then it goes up through the new corn. We dry at roughly 185 degrees, depending on the moisture and yields. But then we pull so say we start about 25% moisture is where we try to start harvesting. The moisture coming out of the dryer we like is 17 to 16% moisture, and we put drying floors in all of our bins. And so that last few points of moisture, we run aeration fans on there. And what we found is not only saves a lot in terms of energy costs and with propane, because getting those last few points out cost a lot of money, but also we are able to keep a very high test weight by not over drying it. And then the question on fertilizer. I would love to be in the position of Jim where we have enough animals to use manure as our primary fertilizer source, and I'm not saying he does or does not, but our cattle operation is not big enough to supply all the manure needs of our farm. We are dabbling with looking into using chicken litter to help supplement our commercial fertilizer. Currently, we are working through some high nutrient levels in our soil, which we're blessed to have there, but we got to stay diligent and making sure, and that's where the cover crops kind of come into play, that those nutrients stay in our ground. And so we are very careful about how much we apply, when we can apply, and making sure that we don't apply too much.
OK， 非常谢谢。现场还有没有？其实，Jimmy wanna OK。
If I could add just a little bit to the nutrient and the fertility because of our hog barns, and that was done by design. When I made the decision to build those barns, it was based on there was an opportunity, there was a need, and also it allowed us to be able to financially justify bringing in my son and my son-in-law into the operation full-time. But we always say, guys, this is going to help you guys build equity, but it's going to help the farm. We are producing our own fertilizer for about half of our corn acres, and so we're not at the mercy of market fluctuations. It's allowed us to keep our cost of production on those acres significantly lower. We have about a $50 an acre advantage on our fertilizer bill. It changes our cost of production from anywhere from about $4.80 per bushel, and on those manure acres, it'll drop it down to about $4.25 a bushel. Makes a difference between profit and loss some years.
我每次在听农民在分享的时候，我都很有感触，因为他们是世代都在那块农田里面，所以他们会要想办法，就是他要把这个土地继续留给他的后代，那继续的永续的发展，所以他们会对于环境永续也相对是非常重视的。OK， 现场不晓得还没有，应该大家都很有问题，不是很有问题啦，很有疑问，不是你有问题，不好意思。Craver，
The question is related to climate change. Do you American farmers, do you have any measures for facing the headache of climate change, please?
In Minnesota, we are very, very familiar with climate change because we say just wait 5 minutes and it's going to change again. But all the practices that we use on our farm, from, as Nate mentioned, fuel economy and reductions, the emissions, Right now, one of the projects that Minnesota has actually funded, and I think Ohio might have also, is ethanol, 98% ethanol-powered semi-truck. Okay, that's a research project, but now it's a reality. That truck is operational and it's on the road. So ethanol reduces your emissions significantly, and that's an example of one of the little things that as farmers we're doing is investing in those types of things. The U.S. Grains Council has a program, it's called a CSAP program, and that program was designed specifically to highlight the efforts that farmers take on reducing our impact and reducing our emissions. So that CSAP program is something I'm quite pleased to be able to be a kind of part of it. But cover crops, that's a big factor. We don't use a moldboard plow anymore where we used to. All of us directors at Minnesota, we went through a sustainability analysis on our own farms. So one of the things that come out of that was by the use of manure from our pig barns, that replaces commercial fertilizers. So when we're talking about 45Z, the tax credit, and whether or not it becomes a reality, we're already at a carbon negative. We're utilizing filter strips, buffer strips along any of our drainage ways. We've got CRP acres, Conservation Reserve Program payment, acres. We actually have wildlife habitat. We've taken our least productive acres and we've put them into permanent wildlife habitat acres. So all things considered, I think we're doing our part on our farm, and I think most other farms are as well. But I will say, as a young man, when we were moldboard plowing, when you turn that dirt over, you release all that carbon. We're not doing that anymore. The only time that carbon is being released is when you open a can of beer or soda.
I don't think I have a whole lot more to add. Jim kind of covered it pretty well. Like I said in my presentation, we use the buffer strips in there. They create wildlife habitat. It's always a living plant in the ground. We use cover crops. We have waterways we've been installing the last few years. Anytime where we have soil erosion, where it's prevalent year after year after year, it pays to put a waterway in there to protect your field, to keep the soil in your field instead of having it washed down. And this last year, we updated our grain dryer. It was not the best of timing. It was a 2-year project where we were looking at doing these updates, and unfortunately, I should have probably pulled the plug 2 years ago when we first started, but you never control the market. But just updating our grain dryer, it uses about 30% less fuel than our old dryer, even though the mechanism and the idea of drying the grain was the same. Just the efficiencies in the fan, the efficiencies in the burner have increased that much. So we're saving about 30% of fuel just by that updated dryer.
Okay, right.
One thing to add on the grounds of adopting different technologies and farm management practices to address things like climate change. And, I'm kind of very excited to be sitting between two people who do rye cover crops direct plant, because I think that is really, really cool. But it's really going to depend, too, on where you're at. You heard someone who uses irrigation versus dry land. The realities of how you produce and what's going to be the best for your farm and what's going to be the most environmentally and economically rational, it's going to depend. If you're pulling corn out of Kansas, for example, you're not going to do a cover crop. You don't have enough rain to do a cover crop. You're going to be short in your subsoil moisture. It's really going to be, and in this, I think, is going to wrap back around in the coming months in a very real way as the U.S. government sets these standards for GREET, for setting the 45Z. Because there's going to be a need to make that policy flexible enough to not be prescriptive to how farmers farm based on geography, because where you're at, Nebraska versus Missouri versus Ohio versus Michigan versus Kansas, What's going to be appropriate and make sense for you is going to depend on where you are. And so those things are going to need to be flexible, and we're going to have to be intelligent about how we adopt those practices and those policies so that we're not prescribing things that are counterproductive. And so just from a policy perspective, something to be aware of, and from a farm management perspective, and what you expect from your farmers. You know, you have to be cognizant of where they are and the environmental realities of where they are in terms of what you expect them to do to meet those types of expectations.
Okay, a question for
one logistic question, right? Because about net, right? Net mentioned about not to over dry the grain, right? But you know, if the drier the grain cargo can keep longer, right? Right? Keep it safe, right? So it's a trade-off, right? Okay, so I'm just wondering how do you make a decision whether it's over dry or not, right? Normally you say like 16 from 25% down to 16, but if it down to like the moisture content down to like 13, it keep longer, right? So how do you make the trade-off between the degree of the moisture content and the storage period? Because you know, Taiwan is far away from Taiwan. We noticed that some cargo arrive here, especially in container, right? Containerized grain cargo arrive is sometimes, if the situation is not okay, it will get some mold, so it will damage the cargo. So I'm wondering how can we do to make better, keep a better condition, or when you say the over dry, okay, so that's my question.
Okay. And our situation too is probably a little bit different. So we try to get it out of the dryer at 17, and then the optimal, if I could pick the moisture that I want in our bin, I would be about 15 to 15.5%. But our storage is a lot, conditions are probably a lot easier than what you guys face, because once we come after harvest, it's going into winter. So then what we do, be it right or be it wrong, but it's worked really well for us, is we cool that grain down then and get it cold. One that lets us keep it longer, and it keeps any insect damage very, very low because they don't like it cold. But then we also don't have the grain storage to where we don't keep it year over year over year. But like in your conditions, it will store better at probably the 13%. But when we go to sell it, we're selling bushels, but we're getting paid on weight. So we dry it down that much, that loses a lot of value for us as farmers. So we try to hit that 15 to 15.5%. And typically we try to have our bins cleaned out, I would say no later than September. And even in September, when we're hauling it out, if we go to a new bin where it hasn't been touched and we have it cold from the winter, even going through all summer, when we start pulling that corn out, it's still cold from the core.
Similar, but one thing I will add is on our farm, we tend to dry down, and our goal is about 14.5%. And just for the very same reasons that you experience. One thing we experience is there's a thing called moisture rebound. And so it's very important to, as you're running your corn through the dryer, it's very important when you dump it in your storage bin that you run those fans and you run them long enough to not only cool it down, but also you push that extra moisture out. So even though he's, dumping maybe at 17%, by the time he's done, pushing the moisture out. And in our case, there's actually moisture that'll come dripping off of the bin roofs. You've got to run those aeration fans until you're done pushing moisture off those bin roofs. And that's just a management thing. We freeze our corn down. That gives us a couple of advantages. The climate can work with you or against you. And being in a considered tropical climate, storage is a huge issue. You make the investments in silos and storage containers and whatnot, or you just get a lot more livestock and feed that corn faster.
Thank you. So I think Jim and Nate certainly mentioned a lot of very important things, and especially when we talk about tropical grain storage, there are a lot of factors to consider that we don't necessarily see in the United States. So one thing that we always look at the council side, we've been doing work on tropical grain storage management training. So it's very important also to continue to monitor the grain. As much as I would love to say that corn quality stays the same or gets better with time, unfortunately it doesn't. So if you have the ways to monitor it, make sure that the fans are working as they should at the times that they should, and also seeing the head space, that's where you're able to really pinpoint where mold is developing, where insect infestations are developing. So taking those extra steps are also very key to prolonging the shelf life of the grain.
谢谢 ，Thank you。那因为时间的关系，我开放最后一个问题给现场，好不好？可以是杨总来。
谢谢卢代表。那还有我们在场所有产官学界先进，还有来自美国的好朋友。OK， 我有两个问题想请教来自密苏达州的那个 Jim。那在问他问题之前，还是第一个先表达对他们家族致力于这个谷物生产的贡献表达感谢之意。第二个的话是非常羡慕他们家族这个这么好的一个凝聚力，还有你那个健康又长寿91岁的妈妈。好，那当然我两个问题，第一个问题是说在你自己生产的玉米里面呢，有多少是出售当成饲料原料，有多少是当成那个酒精发酵厂去收购的？那这个比例是取决于酒精发酵厂他们的收购价，还是有其他的因素？这第一个问题。第二个问题是，目前在 CME 的那个玉米的期货行情，大概在每英斗大概在480上下。那我不知道目前为止，在最近的一批，我们整个明尼苏达州他们的生产成本大概在什么价位？我相信现在比对现在行情，你们应该有蛮好的获利才对。谢谢。
My mother would thank you for those comments. We are blessed with our family, and thank you for that. Appreciate that. Our economic conditions right now, we're doing our projections for what we're going to plant, corn or soybeans. And, I mentioned earlier in my presentation it's about 50-50, and we try to preserve that rotation. We're still at or just slightly below our cost of production, and that's a challenge for us to work through. I guess after Friday's report, it looked like we could get about $4.60 for a bushel of corn in Minnesota, where we're at. I recently made an investment. I partnered with the person that supplies the pigs for our pig barns. And with that investment, that was in a feed milling. He's got his own mill. So now all of a sudden the shoe is on the other foot, so to speak. We're buying corn. A larger percentage of our corn is going to go through that feed mill, and it's going to come back through our hogs. And so it kind of completes that circle, if you will. And I view that more as a sustainability issue, really. But before that, upwards of 60 to 70% of my corn might go through an ethanol plant. And it's really, there's 6 plants right within a geographic locale of me, so we have options. Which ethanol plant we go to is often determined by price that they are paying at the time. Those ethanol plants, management makes a huge difference on an ethanol plant. The profitable ethanol plants are very well managed, and then there's plants that go out of business because they're not very well managed. So that's one thing that we always have to consider. But there's several load-out facilities that have been built near us for unit trains. And those trains will go down into Mexico, a fair amount of them, or else in southern United States for the feedlots and that are there. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, kind of where our market is.
OK， 因为时间的关系，所以这个我们座谈就到这边结束。我在此先代表美国谷物协会以及台湾饲料工业同业工会，谢谢各位的莅临。那等一下中午的时候我们有餐点在后面，我希望我们继续我们这样的一个对话在我们的中午的这个休息午餐时间他们的几位都会在座，也欢迎大家跟我们继续的来互动。再次感谢大家的莅临，非常谢谢 ，and thank you for all your the speakers for the symposium that make this so successful. Thank you very much. Thank you. 谢谢大家。